For this 90s sports nostalgia video, I want to mention who I thought were the 5 most underrated NFL players in the 90s. Now I understand underrated is a sports term that is used very loosely, and everyone will have a list different than me as there are so many varying opinions on this topic. So feel free to comment because I look forward to seeing some interesting names and seeing who others feel were underrated. Before I get to the list, I just want to say I try to stick to players who didn't make more than one Pro Bowl. And these players, they aren't in any particular order, as I'll start with the defensive backfield and make my way positionally to the offensive backfield, as there's a running back I really want to mention. So without further ado, the first underrated player in the 90s I'd like to talk about is Donnell Woolford. When Woolford was in his prime, it was tough to make the Pro Bowl as a cornerback in the NFC, where mainly only 3 cornerbacks were chosen, as it was easy to be overlooked and hard to make a name for yourself with corners like Deion Sanders, Darrell Green, Eric Allen, and Aeneas Williams. But I thought Woolford was one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL in the 90s, as he could cover, make plays, but was greatly overshadowed. In addition, Woolford made one of the greatest plays I ever saw. I can't find it on the internet, but for this play, Barry Sanders, he broke through, was cruising toward a long touchdown near the sideline, as it looked like to be an easy touchdown with number 20 running. But Woolford had an angle all the way from the other side of the field and caught Sanders and made the tackle. The play went for at least 80 yards, if I remember correctly, but it was amazing how Woolford denied a Barry Sanders long touchdown run. The next NFL player I want to mention that is underrated is Sam Cowart, and the former Florida State linebacker was awesome. One of the best linebackers in the late 90s, making tackles and making plays all over the field. Now Cowart, he did make a Pro Bowl in 2000, but he probably would have received more accolades, but unfortunately Cowart, he had an Achilles tendon injury in 2001 and wasn't the same. But from 1998 to 2000, Cowart was one of the best. And because of his short career, people forget how great he was, and I feel like I need to mention him. Now, it helped that Ted Washington was a nose tackle, while Cowart was all around, flying, making plays from sideline to sideline in Buffalo, but nonetheless, number 56, he was so good playing in the middle of that defense. The third most underrated NFL player in the 90s I want to mention is Chuck Smith. So, there were other defensive ends I was thinking about mentioning, like Sean Jones, Rob Burnett, or Tony Brackens, but I decided to go with Chuck Smith. While with the Falcons, Smith was never a Pro Bowler, which was surprising, but he was once named a second-team All-Pro. As Smith, he never had great talent around him on the defensive line. Whenever I saw Chuck Smith play, he seemed to be really disruptive, pressuring the quarterback, and I wonder if Pro Football Focus was around back then, what his pass rushing grades would be, and how many pressures he would have been credited with. Smith was nicknamed Dr. Rush, but really isn't well remembered for how good of a pass rusher he was. Dr. Rush was the Falcons' all-time leader in sacks before John Abraham overtook that top spot. The next underrated NFL player I want to mention from the 90s is wide receiver Tony Martin. So in the mid-90s, wide receivers and their numbers, they began to explode, and Tony Martin became a part of that. Numerous wide receivers could be labeled as underrated in the 90s, as there were so many very good wide receivers, and it was easy to be overshadowed, as I felt Tony Martin was extremely overshadowed. Now, I barely remember Tony Martin early on in his career with the Dolphins, but when he went to San Diego, Martin, he'd really become the Chargers' number 1 wide receiver, as I thought he had it all. Good hands, really ran solid routes, was good after the catch, and could also be a deep threat. I felt Martin was better than what his stats showed. Martin's best seasons, they came in 1995 and 1996, as he led the NFL in touchdown receptions in 1996. Then Martin, he went to Atlanta, and he was so important in improving that passing game as he teamed up with another underrated wide receiver in Terrence Mathis. And then in 1999, Martin, he returned to Miami and he recorded another 1,000-yard season. The final, most underrated NFL player from the 90s I want to mention is Charlie Garner. And I wanted to leave Garner for last because I think so highly of the former Tennessee Volunteer. Garner, he was so quick, seemed to never lose speed when he changed direction, and was an excellent receiver. And I felt he was the second most elusive running back in the 90s behind Barry Sanders. There were times during his career when I was baffled that Garner wanted to get more touches because he was so talented. Now, part of that is probably the fact that he only weighed 190 pounds. And also while in Philadelphia, it was going to be hard for Garner to get touches, with Ricky Watters always demanding to get the ball. But Garner, he did average over 5 yards a carry a couple of seasons while with the Eagles. But then Garner, he went to San Francisco, and in his first season with the Niners, Garner, he ran for over 1,200 yards while averaging 5.1 yards per carry and totaled over 1,700 yards from scrimmage. as this is what I expected from Charlie Garner if he ever got the chance. Then in 2000, Garner, he made his only Pro Bowl, and once again he gained over 1,700 yards from scrimmage, but his best season may have been his 2002 season with the Raiders. And sorry for dipping into the 2000s, but in 2002, Garner had 962 yards rushing with a tremendous 5.3 yards per attempt. And Garner, he also recorded 91 receptions for 941 yards. Garner was so close to becoming the third player ever to record 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving in a season. Roger Craig and Marshall Faulk were the two others that previously accomplished the double 1,000-yard feat. So those are the NFL players who I thought were the 5 most underrated NFL players in the 90s. I know everyone will have their own list with so many different players. Comment below, as I would be very interested in knowing who you thought was underrated in the 90s. Thanks for watching this video, and thank you so much for the support.